There's promising developments on the treatment front, which is good news because I think the summer pause theory is now dead in the water. Hello, everyone. This is Chris Martenson with your daily SARS-CoV-2 update. Today is March 30th, 2020. This is your honey badger virus update. I name it that because it's so hard to contain this thing. I'm calling this one here today, Mistakes Were Made. And the first mistake was mine. I'm going to start with a correction. I mentioned yesterday that I thought perhaps that Germany was not recording some COVID deaths, and that could be the explanation for its lower death count. And a lot of you weighed in to help correct me on that, so let me make that correction right now. A little clarification from Nadine here saying the Robert Koch Institute, the RKI in Germany, counts as coronavirus death everyone who died and is positively tested, regardless if they had pre-existing conditions. And this link here, which is here, goes to this statement translated helpfully by Google. According to the RKI, anyone who was infected and dies with the current coronavirus counts as a corona death, regardless of whether he died directly from the illness as a result of the infection or whether he suffered from several illnesses, and the decisive factor is unclear. So thank you for that, because we have this clarification, we can now turn this into a hypothesis, which is really helpful here, and it looks like this. So Germany has a really low death and serious complication rate. And I'm going to show you that in their numbers very soon, much lower than other countries. But that could be, the hypothesis is that, well, that's due to these really high levels of testing. Germany is now testing 500,000 tests per week, right, as of the 27th of March there. So that's way more than some countries can manage to date so far. So Germany is really up on the testing curve. So what does that mean? The hypothesis then is that because they're finding and catching more of these non-serious cases, that becomes and turns into a lower rate of serious and critical conditions and also the CFR. All right. So the hypothesis then would conclude that if other countries tested more, their values, their serious, critical, and CFR values would then begin to align with Germany's. So this all sort of fits with this, what we talked about yesterday, which was the 86% undocumented, meaning most people with COVID are not being detected by tests. So they go off as undocumented, and either they never present or they get present at the doctors and get turned away because there's no test to be had or anything like that. But if, giant if, that's in bold, capital letters, if this hypothesis holds, then using Germany's numbers as the realistic ones, then the final case fatality rate for this would settle in at around 0.4%. Still 4 times worse than the flu, and obviously a lot worse than the flu because everybody's going to catch it all at once and there's no herd immunity and all sorts of other reasons. You still wouldn't say that just 4 times as bad as the flu. In terms of the hospital system, that 0.4% would still be many, many times worse. Because remember now what we're talking about here, what we want to finally get to when we talk about the case fatality rate is the numerator and the denominator. So Germany's given us a better sense of the denominator, I think. Now we're going to have to let some time run and make sure that Germany's numbers don't accidentally or somehow otherwise approach other countries. But that's the hypothesis I'm going to work off of right now. And seems like we could back that up pretty reasonably. As we move on, I want to talk to you about something called the shifting baseline. Shifting baselines process. That is the gradual normalization of the changes that you might see in the world where each successive generation begins at a new baseline and measures change against that. So one of the most common examples of this would be a fisheries biologist in the 60s. They saw all kinds of, there were tuna all in the ocean, and there's just the oceans are really abundant. But ocean fish stocks really declined during their career and came down to here, right? I use this black pen. Come down to here, and then a fisheries biologist starts in the 80s. They start their career here, but this is their baseline. And then over the course of their career, they see this happen, right? And then the fisheries biologist begins their career in the 2000s, and over their career, they see this happen. And if you took this biologist here and suddenly dropped them here, they would be horrified at the change that had happened all at once. But because the baseline happened gradually over their entire career, and then somebody started a new baseline, that shifting baseline never really gets noted. And it's a real serious consideration because that happens, and then all of a sudden you find yourself out of options because you didn't notice that the baseline was shifting. Like too much damage has been done before you actually catch up to it. So how does that apply to us? Is there any place where we could notice where our own baselines might have shifted? So let's turn to today's numbers really quickly. Here's the United States with 143,000 cases, 19,000 new ones. Again, I'm recording this on the 30th. So these are the complete days numbers for the March 29th. Okay. And we look at these numbers and we can talk about all these numbers now. And I go, oh, now we're seeing 5-digit numbers up here and starting to populate almost entirely with 4-digit numbers. And I told you when we were at 3, we would go to 4 and all of that stuff. So let's reshift our baselines before I continue on with these numbers. Let's go back 1 month. Here we are. These are the numbers I presented in a presentation just like this on YouTube on February 27th. And we had China in the clear lead. All we had was South Korea way back here with a fraction of what China had. USA was 60. Italy with just a few cases here, relatively speaking. Just a few deaths, right? This is the world that we lived in just a month ago. This is the world today. And people wake up and they see these numbers. Their baselines have shifted. So they're starting now, waking up in the morning, and each day, this process of normalization. That's the normalization of the changes that we see. And this has become the new normal. Whereas if I took you a month ago and I told you this is what the world was going to look like in a month, 98% of you would have said I'm nuts. And rightfully so, because you wouldn't have understood the exponential function. You wouldn't have understood how that this really could have happened, that the doubling wasn't intuitive. So that's why we've spent our time trying to educate people about how exponential functions work, what doubling times look like, so that you can begin to make the rapid decisions you need to make. And I'm so, so grateful that so many of you not only wrote to tell me this, but more importantly, took the steps to get yourselves prepared and got your families either out of harm's way or got your immunocompromised people out of harm's way, got face masks for yourself, for your family, got food stored away, developed plans. We're ready to make that adjustment process earlier because of being able to interpret and digest data like this. So that's the reason we do what we do, because you can change 2 ways humans change, 2 big ways. One is by pain, and the other is by insight. By far, the most common is changing by pain, right? You back over the dog in the driveway, and then you decide to give up drinking. You end up presenting with a heart attack, and then you get serious about the diet. Of course, you can just go online and read about hazards of drinking and read about the benefits of being healthier. But that would be changing by insight. And so really by far the most common way to change is by pain. However, for those of you who are able to hear this and change by insight, see the numbers, see the data, see the conclusions, follow the logic, you were able to get yourself prepared in advance. And that's a wonderful thing. It gives me a lot of hope that we can do that. So carrying on, this is probably, I'm sure, already changed that as of today. I'm, for sure, Spain is now above China here. Obviously, they're, clocking in at 7,000 cases a day now. They're clearly going to be in 3rd place now. And Germany's still moving up very smartly. But again, notice here the total deaths relative to cases and the total number of serious or critical relative to cases. Germany is just at a fraction of where other people are. So again, this is probably due to really aggressive testing. And if everybody tested similarly, that's what we would see, more numbers that sort of, I think, fell along lines that look like that. Now, that does imply that the United States has many, many more cases than it knows about at this point in time. I guess if you sort of averaged all of these numbers out, that would be, that's 5 times as many. So 5 times that would be 300,000. So it would just doing the numbers in my head, roughly speaking, the United States would have at least twice as many cases as it knows about right now. And that's a problem, because if you don't know where your cases are and you haven't tracked them, it's very, very hard to stop this disease or slow it down. All right, we have lots of, from Belgium on up, a lot of countries with more than 10,000 cases right now. And a lot of countries starting to report a large increase in the deaths right now. Of course, it takes time to get to the death stage because there's a infection process, there's an incubation process, there's the presenting to the hospital with symptoms, there's an 8-day symptom window typically. Then things take a turn for the worse. Might be another week or 2 of really fighting that before the death shows up. So there's a good month to 6 weeks of burn between when your cases really start to explode and later when the deaths start to show up. So some of these countries are pretty early on that curve and have not quite got there yet, and they will, unfortunately, get there. All right. So if we look at the total cases, it's still exponential. We got a straight line here. However, see that? Looks like that dot's starting to fall off a tiny little bit. 641,951 cases outside of China. Let's zoom in on this little part right here. And you can see that, yes, this is a straight line coming up through here. And this ball's just ever so slightly under it. Two explanations for that. One, we're getting ahead of this thing, and we're going to start seeing more and more of this flattening out as these balls go this way and fall and go flatter and flatter. That naturally will happen when you've really got your hands around the disease. It certainly would happen once you've gotten past a certain percentage of the population's been infected. It would also happen if you happen to start introducing, I don't know, lots of good NPIs and or a vaccine. The other reason it could all be happening, of course, is that your testing can't keep up with the explosion in cases. Because remember, a flat line on a log chart means something is growing exponentially. So this has been growing exponentially. And even if it flattens out, it's still a flat line, but that flat line is headed up. It's still growing exponentially. So what we really need to see is a complete flattening of that line for this to no longer be truly exponential. All right, things are really starting to look bad in Ecuador. And let me see if I can play this over here on this side. That beeping is some machine in the background, but you can clearly see there's people lying on the floor. I don't know if they're dead or not. There's body bags around. You see lots of them stacked up in the hospitals here. People in chairs. Don't know what's going on there, but it looks pretty bad in Guayaquil right now. Guayaquil and Ecuador really exploding with cases, and very bad because, of course, I think the state of the hospital system down there not at all ready to deal with something like this. And as well, it's not good for our theory or hypothesis that there would be a summer pause, because somehow the temperatures would lead to higher summer temperatures, and higher humidities might lead to a slow spread of the disease. We see here, this is current conditions in Guayaquil here, and Guayaquil, however that's pronounced, in the 80s and 90s. To me, I call that summer. Very summery sort of humidities here. So at this point, looks like we're going to have to say the summer pause theory is no longer viable. Quarantines as well, they only last so long. Already we're starting to see signs of social unrest in Italy. Italy is becoming impatient with the lockdown. So I don't know how long some of these places have been in lockdown, but it's been many weeks at this point in time. It says here the strain is showing in the south of the country, where, by the way, the south of the country doesn't have very much of an explosion of cases right now. All the worst parts are up in the north, up in the Lombardy region. In the south, not that much, but the south, too, is in lockdown. So where it says here, one man in Puya reportedly called police after the bank closed and they couldn't withdraw his mother's pension, their only income. Footage shows him shouting at officers, telling them the family has no money, his mother begging them to go to their home so she could show them they have no food. It's hard to watch. That's what desperation looks like. Images have also emerged of police descending on supermarkets in Palermo and Sicily after reports people have started stealing to feed themselves. And groups have been set up in the last few days on social media to organize raids of supermarkets. Further, the mayor of Palermo told Sky News crime gangs are exploiting people's hardship and inciting violence. He warns a social emergency is next. So when we said we have that balancing act between getting the R naught below 1 so the pandemic can be contained, not overwhelming the hospital system, and as well keeping the economy going, this just shows that there's only so long a quarantine can really last. And so the quarantine, I think, is a great first step. That's the hammer. But then you've got to make sure that you're coming out with the dance as fast as possible. You need logical, coherent, cogent plans for how you're going to be releasing people out of lockdown. There's lots of, I think, clever, creative ways to do that, which would include figuring out who your least vulnerable people are, allowing them to get out. And as well, I'm going to talk to you in a minute about how Germany is going to go about this. Again, in a very logical, very approachable way, along the lines of what I suggested yesterday. A bunch of you sent me this. First, let's do this before we go on to the Germany stuff and go into some of the other data I've got. More hope for hydroxychloroquine. Let's hope this is true. This is a story that a lot of you sent me, as I mentioned, And it goes like this. Dr. Vladimir Zelenko has now treated 699 coronavirus patients with 100% success using hydroxychloroquine, sulfate, zinc, and Z-Pak. Z-Pak being Zithromax. So this report, which comes from Tech Startups team, March 28th. It's not one of the biggest journals out there, and I'm going to show you what I think that means in just a second. Last Wednesday, they published a success story from Dr. Vladimir Zelenko, a board-certified family practitioner in New York, after he successfully treated 350 coronavirus patients with 100% success using a cocktail of drugs, hydroxychloroquine in combination with azithromycin or Z-Pak, an antibiotic to treat secondary infections, and zinc sulfate. The zinc is important, of course, because what does the chloroquine do? Well, it creates these ionophore channels in the cells so that things can get in like, zinc. And zinc is very helpful inside the cell where it can help to fight the virus replication process. All right. So Dr. Zelenko said he saw the symptom of shortness of breath resolved within 4 to 6 hours after treatment. Super exciting if this is true. And he said that the whole treatment costs only $20, only a period of 5 days with 100% success. So you can't argue with that. What I can argue with, and by the way, he defined success as not to die. So that's cool. What I can argue with is that you would think with something this successful that maybe the CDC would swoop in. They would, next thing you know, we'd have access to the patient record data. There would be some sort of a study to go with this. How were all of these people tested positive? What are their ages? What was the split from male to female? How serious were they when they presented? When they resolved within 4 to 6 hours, what did they look like 3 days later? There's a lot of data that we don't have here yet, but this made a big splash. And the reason I'm still a little suspicious is when I just did this just a few minutes ago, and I Googled that term, Zelenko COVID treatment, constrained it to the past 24 hours, this is what showed up. And this isn't CNN. You got to read that carefully. This is CCN, right? So this is some other website. And this is matzav.com. This is rightnowmn.org. This is globalresearch.ca and the Daily Beast. So what I'm not seeing here is big pickup about this by major newspapers. I'm not seeing, big follow-up around this. Not that that means anything necessarily. I lost my faith in them quite a while ago, but I'm not seeing the kind of pickup I would have seen if this is really true. We should have had some other confirmation of that. So I'm still a little suspicious, but hopeful. So I'm presenting it, but I got to tell you, I'm reserving some judgment on this one for now. Remember, the gold standard for the pandemic approach is you halt all inbound infections as step 1, and step 2, face masks for everyone. Okay, and I'm raising this again because we're about to go into public responses here. So I just want to talk about that for a second. Now, this is the data that I had collected and presented. I just pulled this off of the January 29th video that I had put out in this series where I started putting them out on January 24th. So let's see, how did I do all the way back there on January 29th? I told you it was worse than the flu. Told you the case fatality rate was higher than flu. At the time, we thought it was 3%, maybe higher. This was entirely out of data out of China, so we knew it was suspicious. Maybe this is only 0.4%. We don't know. But it's certainly higher than flu. We know that. The thing that really caught us, though, at the time, we had mentioned that the flu has an R0 of 1.28. But this has we had set the range at 2.5 to 3.5. We then bumped that a little higher in the weeks that followed. I think it's, again, the R0 is not an intrinsic value of the virus. If you had no containment measures and nobody knew it was coming and we were just like farm animals and people had no awareness, then it is an intrinsic value of the virus. But as soon as people start reacting to the virus, social distancing, washing hands, doing things like that, then the R0 comes down. So if the R0 was something you couldn't budge, then there'd be nothing we could do. Just live with it. But we can get the R0 to budge. So at the time, that's what it looked like the R0 was. It looks like if in the early days of spreading, if you are not on top of this rigorously, like it looks like they are not in Guatemala right now, in Ecuador, then they're going to be experiencing a very high R0 there. But that's a pretty fair estimation, and I think most everybody's using 3 right now as the starting point, 3.0. All right, and then we said the serious complication rate, though, that this is what set it apart from the flu. This was the thing that worried us the most, was overwhelming the hospital system because of the ICU bed requirement with flu. It's under 1%. We thought at the time it was around 20%. Looks like it might be settling in at around 15%, but that's of known cases. And maybe that's lower now if we get a more complete accounting. But at any rate, that was enough to go on. And whether these numbers were exactly right or needed amending or anything like that, directionally, they were all correct. Directionally, they said, hey, we've got a serious pandemic virus coming. I was very unequivocal about that and presented that very clearly on the 29th. So let's go forward now. And this was the health commissioner of New York City, Osiris Barbot, on February 7th. Here's what was coming out of the New York health commissioner then.
New Yorkers to know is that in the city currently, their risk is low and our city preparedness is high. And so we know that this virus can be transmitted from one individual to another, but that it's typically people who live together, that there's no risk at this point in time, we're always learning more, about having it be transmitted in casual contact, right? So we're telling New Yorkers, go about your lives, take the subway, go out, enjoy life, but practice everyday precautions.
Right. So we don't know if it can be transmitted by casual contact, but we don't know what kind of contact is required, right?
Well, we know that it can be transmitted when people are living together and have extended contact. We also know that if it were likely to be transmitted casually, we would be seeing a lot more cases.
Right, because this is New York, and you're in elevators and trains with everybody all the time.
No, that was we had data back here. Somebody who's a health commissioner ought to understand the difference between 1.28 and 2.5 to 3.5. This does spread very casually. That's what that says. That was the data we had, and that was more than a week before this particular interview was taped. So that's plenty of time to get up the curve, look at the data, understand these things. That was obviously that did not age well. But we can go all the way to today on March 30th. This is the public health minister for Canada coming out and talking about face mask wearing for people in the public. Let's listen in.
For the public, I think the current scientific evidence we are continuing to evaluate. Of course, we can be flexible if we find any new evidence. But I think the scientific evidence is that if you are sick, then put on a mask to prevent those droplets from flying, in any space as you're perhaps going to a clinic or having to move yourself around the community for essential needs. Putting a mask on an asymptomatic person is not beneficial, obviously, if you're not infected. If you're close contact.
How would you know that? How would you know if an asymptomatic person has not been infected? You can't know that. That's established fact at this point. So this is what we're up against, is that the people who are supposed to be the experts, are supposed to be most in charge, are really not even up to date with data that's now at this point months old. The asymptomatic data is months old, and we presented that back in January as well.
Contact of a case, and under certain circumstances, especially, you'll also be in self-isolation, by the way, if you're close contact of a case, and you also need to move for any essential reason. That's perhaps another situation. What we worry about is actually the potential negative aspects of wearing masks, where people are not protecting their eyes or, other...
Okay, so okay, all right. The idea that if you're wearing a mask, it's a bad idea to wear a mask because then you're not protecting your eyes. I guess it's just like, since the eyes are a small potential route of transmission, but, if you wear a mask, you might forget to protect your eyes. So then let's not wear the mask, which, of course, is the major source of route of transmission. Out of the body first, and then, of course, back into your body second, because that's where you breathe stuff in, right? Things couldn't land on your eyes, but when you're circulating air, filtering it, you're basically a large walking filter device that's pulling air in, filtering it out, and pushing it back out in the world. So this idea that she just proposed that a mask is dangerous because it doesn't remind people to cover up their eyes also ignores the fact that when everybody's wearing a mask, you don't have to have your eyes covered at all because, again, where would the particles come from? If everybody's wearing a mask, all those particles will be stopped.
Aspects of where the virus could enter your body, and that gives you a full sense of confidence. But also, it increases the touching of your face, if you think about it.
What? The mask increases the touching of your face. I have a different hypothesis, which is it reminds you not to rub your nose, not to touch your mouth, not to put, and by the way, it physically prevents you from touching your inside of your nose or the inside of your mouth where the mucosal membranes exist, where that's really the most effective transmission. You touch something out there in the world, it's got viral fomites on it, infective viral fomites, and then you pick that up and then you pick your nose, you touch, you wipe your lips, something happens, right? That's the transmission mechanism. So that's what a mask actually prevents. Let's see what Dr. Tam has to say about that.
If you've got a mask around your face, sometimes you can't help it because you're just touching parts of your face.
Okay, here's the thing. If you touch parts of your face, right, because you're adjusting a strap or something like that, the virus doesn't go through your face, all right? So the whole idea of saying don't touch your face is actually to prevent you from touching your mouth and your nose or rubbing your eyes, right? So let's be clear about this. The virus comes in through one of those mucosal membranes, a wet part of your body, right? A mucosal membrane is inside your nose, inside your mouth, inside your eyes, right? And in particular, it has to dock on the ACE2 receptors. There are none of those on the skin outside of the body. Those ACE2 receptors are all up in the nasopharyngeal cavities and down in your lungs, okay? So those are the two places where the virus can dock. Anywhere else in your body, it can't do anything. So what she just said, this idea that if you're adjusting a strap around your ear, that somehow puts you at greater risk than not having a mask at all, is absolutely unscientific poppycock. It's ridiculous to hear this.
Thing is, the outside of the mask could be contaminated as well. So the key is hand washing, absolutely, for sure.
Yeah. Okay. That's just terrible advice. So I'm filing all this under self-inflicted wounds. And again, if we had adequate PPE for everybody, you wouldn't be hearing her say stuff like that. This is just, again, I get what the talking points are. I understand why they feel they have to say it, but I honestly think we should go with honesty at this point in time. Now, both these people, they're in pretty fine company though, because there was plenty of company through this whole thing, in the media, and this was the thing that we were fighting here at Peak Prosperity. And what I was personally trying to fight the whole time was this wall of information that was just bad. Forget the coronavirus, it says. The flu pandemic in 1918 killed more people in 1 year than all of World War I. Okay, how's that helpful to me? As the coronavirus spreads, fear is fueling racism and xenophobia. Like, really, that's really more important than the fact that we have a pandemic virus on the way? It's not. Amid coronavirus outbreak, doctors remind public flu is deadlier, more widespread, right? On and on and on, right? Forgetting that this is very much not the flu, is very different. All right. We're going to go back to the future. A number of you sent me this fine picture. I like this. Wear a mask or go to jail. And this is how the pandemic of 1918 was fought. Everybody wore a mask. She's got her nose over it. I think she's being a bit of a rebel. She should pull that up. But everybody's wearing a mask, and even a cotton mask like they're wearing is better than nothing. And so when we look at this, how we're fighting things back in 1918, people tend to look back and go, oh, that was then. We're so much more sophisticated now. Or are we? We now have field hospital tents going up in Central Park. And, whoever thought that we would see something like this going up in Central Park doesn't look all that different from what we saw going up in 1918, right? So just tents. And why? Because tents go up quickly and easily. And there's a lot of benefit, actually, to having people outdoors. And you need a lot of airflow and high volume circulation to float all of those virus particles away as well. Probably some good benefits of fresh air as well as sunshine. That's what we're starting to determine. And yesterday I said that my prediction was we might infect on purpose so that people, you could at least inoculate with the smallest possible infective dose, give people the best chance at coming through this with very few complications or greater chance of having a non-serious case. And then I suggested armbands, badges for everyone who had it so we could see who that is. Or I don't care, you could have special big hats with fake ostrich plumes if you wanted, or really cool medallions. I don't care. Some of you took offense to the idea of armbands, but we just don't have time for that level of sensitivity here. What I was suggesting was it's important that we know who's had it. Hey, guess who's ahead of this challenge already? This would be Germany. Germany's got testing spot on, and they plan to test hundreds of thousands for the presence of antibodies. Oh, this is great. Remember, an antibody tells you who has immunity already, and then issue immunity certificates to those who test positive, allowing their work to be exempt from the lockdown this is how we're going to get around this thing. This is how we get past the lockdown. This is, how we don't have quarantines that break the spirit of people. This information will be a huge weapon against the virus. We also have an effort ongoing in the United States. In Colorado, one entire community is being tested as well for these antibodies. Again, we need to know this. If we know how many people in the population have antibodies to this thing, that gives us really critical information about where we are in the infection cycle. Are we at the beginning or are we closer to the end? We make very different decisions based on how many people are infected. And secondarily, you can have these immunity certificates or however you want to identify these people. And then these people can get back to work, and that's awesome. Here in the United States, we're bailing out everything and everybody, just not equally. So notice here, they say that individuals in the United States have $560 billion of liquidity fire hose directed at them. That's $300 billion of cash payments, so that's just under $1,000 per person, and $260 billion in extra unemployment payments, which doesn't work if you're one of those many, many people whose job didn't qualify you for unemployment. So you're locked out of that, right? That does not work for you. So let me see if I can. Oh, there we go. Yeah, that one doesn't work for you. There's some stuff going to public health, $153 billion, some going to hospitals, drug access, stuff like that. So smattering, but these are all really big numbers by any other stretch in any other time. Small businesses get loans, lots of loans. You know what the thing is about loans? You got to pay them back. What about large corporations? Well, some stuff, of course, you got to have more for national security, because how can you have a big giveaway like this without those guys coming up to the trough and getting their fair share, right? But look at this. $425 billion has been identified as other. So I don't know. If you're a small business or an individual, you'll get some assistance or maybe a loan, but large corporations get other. And you know what that means, right? Let's take a look. I think I found some of that other. Ready? Here's some other. Private jet companies could get billions in aid from coronavirus bailout. There it is. That's what we needed. We needed the private jet companies to be bailed out, because good Lord, everybody knows how essential that is. Billions in aid for that. That's every time I kind of hope that somehow the leadership in the managerial class in the United States will begin managing effectively. I read stuff like this and I hang my head for a second. I'm like, oh my God, you can't be serious. But unfortunately, we are. I was kind of hoping to see billions for mask making, but not yet. Well, I guess I'll have to wait for that. All right, how do we beat this thing? Everybody wears a mask. It's that simple. That's a simple solution to a complex problem. That's the start, of course. That isn't the be-all, end-all. You start everybody wearing a mask, and then, of course, you still have to do appropriate social distancing. We're still trying to find out better treatments. We're still trying to work out who's going to be allowed to go back to work. We're doing all kinds of things, right? But the mask is where this all starts. This is the cornerstone of the whole thing. It's not hard, really. You stop new people from coming into your community and bringing infection with them, and then it's just face masks for everybody. And then aggressive testing, which includes now both the PCR test for the active virus in somebody, as well as the antibody test to determine who has already been exposed to, gotten past, and developed immunity to the virus. Always make the tests easy and fast as possible, and you go through the rest of these steps, and you will get your arms around this, and that's how it works. So there are 3 reasons everyone wears a mask. It's just to reinforce this from yesterday. It stops infected people from expelling infectious particles. That's part 1. Remember that gross video with all the particles flying out of those people's mouths while they talked? It helps to remind you to not touch your face, unlike what Dr. Tam said out of Canada. And if infected, anyway, if that happens, you have a much better chance of starting small with a low inoculum, which gives you a better disease outcome. So you're not starting with a big fat load that just drags your system down and takes you out. All right, remember, resubscribe to this channel. If you've been unsubscribed, happens all the time. Hit the like button if you like this. If you found it useful, please do that. And if you want, also come by Peak Prosperity. That's my website that I run with Adam Taggart, and we've got a lot of great content there. And as well, we've got a bunch of super offerings. Good conversations going on there all the time about all of this stuff and the economic impacts. All right, conclusions for today. Well, so much for the summer pause hypothesis. I think that seems fatally wounded at this point in time. It just took longer for some reason for the disease to start spreading in some of the South American countries, and I don't have any data of anything coming out of Africa at this point. So, maybe it's not totally a dead theory, But honestly, I think it was just that many of these poorer countries that we see down, like in Ecuador, just hadn't been able to test nearly as aggressively. And so we're just only finding out about their condition once the body bags start showing up. So unfortunately, looks like the summer pause hypothesis is now not viable. Let's continue to hope that the hydroxychloroquine approach proves out, or maybe that remdesivir comes through the clinical trials just a bat out of hell. Oops, bad metaphor. That it comes out proving to be wildly efficacious and all of that other stuff. We'll find some treatments that will work, hopefully. But really, until then, we are all in this together, and everyone has a part to play, and everyone should wear a mask. Those 3 reasons, remember, to stop the symptomatic and the asymptomatic spreaders. No excuse for not knowing that at this point in time about those asymptomatic spreaders. None. 0. 2, help us all not touch our faces. 3, remember, small doses. And again, not touching our faces, I really mean not rubbing our eyes, not touching our nose, not touching our mouth, because it's not our faces. Virus doesn't come through our face. It comes into our face holes. Not including the ears, though. According to that doctor from South Korea, it doesn't come in the ears. So that's good to know. As expected, the U.S. bailout's a corporate giveaway. It's a big free-for-all. Relative crumbs for regular people. And it's just as unseemly as I unfortunately expected it might be. All right. We are going back to the future. It's like 1918 all over again. We're going to see tent cities. We're going to see everybody wearing a mask. It's going to change social behaviors forever. This is the defining event of the people alive today. And it's the defining event of this new generation coming forward. And it's going to change things about how we interact with each other, what kind of jobs we value, how we travel, how we recreate, how we even go to school, what kind of educations we get, our consuming behaviors. Everything has just changed. And I know that's a lot, and that's an emotional process to get through, more than an intellectual process. So as soon as you can begin that adjustment process, the sooner the better. And you know what? I can't end without telling you, plant a garden. Plant a garden. I think I see food issues coming forward. And besides, it's very recuperative and therapeutic to plant and grow things and tend living things. So with that, I'm going to sign off for today. This is Chris Martinson. Everybody be safe, be well, and we'll be back at you tomorrow.
Hi folks, Adam Taggart here. Chris Martinson and I are the co-founders of Peak Prosperity. If you want to get alerted whenever we release a new video from Chris, just click the red subscribe button right beneath the YouTube video player. Once you've done that, a little bell icon will appear right next to it. Click on that bell. It looks like this. And that's it. The next time we publish a video from Chris, you'll immediately receive a notification from YouTube. Thanks for watching our videos.